Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on October 27th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. So first, my usual boring housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you again that you can listen to Karmic Evolution's podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And from there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show and or search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you want to listen again. Also, being technologically challenged by nature, I have managed to attach links to the podcast from Facebook and my Facebook page at Karmic Evolution for Your Soul and Instagram, which apparently just loves links. So you can go into the bio there and access the show really easily from the social media sites. So the show drops every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern, so you can listen to it quote-unquote live or just any time afterwards. And while you're on that page, well, regardless of how you've gotten there, you'll see that there's now a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign, very generic, from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest, who was one of my major mentors when I was learning astrology and learning the ins and outs of evolutionary astrology. And by the way, stay tuned for an announcement on that. Not this show, but in the future. But Stephen Forrest just gave a very simple explanation of what we need to keep each of our individual zodiacal sun signs happy. So by all means, avail yourself of that when you're on the page. And if you do download that freebie, it will sign you up for my weekly Conversations About Consciousness astrology newsletter, which is in flux right now, but stay tuned. Excuse me. I just sneezed. I'm sorry. But if you sign up that way for the newsletter, you can always unsubscribe. So make sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, again, whether you do so live or after the fact, and, enjoy some of Stephen Forrest's astrological words of wisdom. Now, again, separately, you can follow me on my Facebook page. I have started posting on Instagram. Excuse me. So you can find me there on Facebook, Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, Instagram, Karmic Evolution, and they attach to these podcasts as well. And finally, I'm offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners only for only $99. So this is for people who are interested in astrology, want to learn more about their individual birth chart, what it says about their soul's purpose and true mission in this lifetime, and how to gain greater consciousness about these things. So the way I like to put it is that this reading can help you move from chaos to clarity about what has been bothering you, vexing you, holding you back in areas related to perhaps your relationship, your career, which is often tied to finances, and or your physical or mental health, physical, mental, spiritual health, right? So A karmic evolution natal chart reading can help lead you to understanding and then beginning to heal old karmic wounds. And it can help you to learn how, in the process, to co-create your own future happiness and success through such astrological insight. So, as I like to say, that's easy when you take advantage of my 1 hour, $99 discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for podcast listeners only. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. And you can find easy access to this reading, a little bit more about it, and to sign up for it or pay for it through the link at karmicevolution.com/karmic99. That's KARMIC 99. All right, so let's now get to this week's Astro news you can use. As most of you know, the Scorpio new moon partial solar eclipse perfected 2 days ago on October 25th at exactly 2 degrees. That's 2 degrees and 0 minutes of Scorpio. And it asked us, and asks us still, to plant seeds around personal empowerment. Hence, this particular eclipse is about digging deep to get down to the heart of the matter, which is remembering that each of us, both personally and when we add our energies to the collective, not only have the power, but as the good witch Glinda said in The Wizard of Oz, we had it all along. As I discussed at length last week, challenges, particularly those fraught with manipulative and coercive attempts to disempower us, have been coming in at us all for some time, but never more so as we lead up to this year's U.S. midterm elections now, which are now less than 2 weeks away. So before I get to that, though, I want to go back to reiterating astrologer Bernadette Brady's definition of the last set of eclipses. You guys let know if you're regular listeners. I like to go back and then come to the present so that we can look forward. So those were the solar eclipse at 10 degrees, 28 minutes of Taurus on April 30th, and the May 16th lunar eclipse at 25 degrees and 18 minutes of Scorpio. So this particular set of eclipses is known as the Saros Series 6 North. And in Bernadette Brady's book, Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark, she defines the general nature of all of the Saros series of eclipses from their inception. So again, as I related on past podcasts, the spring April 30th solar eclipse, again at 10 degrees and 28 minutes of Taurus, and the May 16th lunar eclipse at 25:18 Scorpio carried this definition according to Brady, and I quote, "This family of eclipses is concerned with the individual's relationship to father figures, authority figures, or the need to take responsibility and control. This is a time to accept the commitments that are presented, commitments which could occur to another person's illness and or another person's unreliability." So what have we seen between now and then as this set of new eclipses takes hold? And on the political level, in the U.S. at least, we've clearly seen both a move to the right, which has been brewing for a long time, admittedly, and the changes to the rights of women in particular since the Supreme Court decision abolishing women's rights to bodily autonomy dropped in June 2022, late June, following this set of eclipses. So the right, meaning conservative rights, taking away rights, meaning rights of others, right? So, just boiling all down there, all right? I mean, that may be looking at it myopically to some, but in this country at least, this is a huge issue. In addition, I don't think anyone can have missed the plummeting of U.S. President Biden's popularity here, fueled both by inflation, including the rise of both groceries and gas costs since last spring's eclipses, nor his attempts to take control of these during the summer, and with last week's announcement about authorizing the release of additional oil or barrels of oil from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve to ease the rise of gas prices now again. Last week I touched on, that soft core manipulation, right? Because no, I'm not doing it because of the election, but are the Saudis and the Russians doing it because of the election? And is it really his way to combat that? Yeah, you decide. But in my opinion, yes. So now let's look at astrologer Ronnie Dreyer's assessment of how eclipses work, which is that if they occur at a particular degree that's not yet one reached by the transiting nodes, then the energy of that eclipse starts at the eclipse and ends theoretically when the transiting nodes reach that sensitized degree. So for example, if we go back to last spring, again, the 10 degree, 28 minute Taurus solar, that's a new moon solar eclipse, occurred when the nodes were at 22 degrees and 28 minutes of Taurus. And I'm using the true nodes here. So the nodes won't reach that degree of the April 30th eclipse until circa January 10th, 2023. So, and I'll just point out that's awfully close to Mars station direct again in Gemini, which occurs on January 12th, but I just plant that seed right now. So regardless, the point is that Ronnie's assessment is that the eclipse energies either begin at the eclipse or culminate and culminate when the nodes reach the same degree, which is that example, or they start when the nodes transit that degree, the degree at which the eclipse will occur in the future, and that represents the culmination point. So we just discussed the April 30th and how it will culminate not until January of next year, but the May 16th lunar eclipse, which occurred at 25 degrees and 18 minutes of Scorpio, would have been in effect starting when the nodes reached that degree, which was circa March 3rd of this year, 2022, and it culminated on May 16th at the eclipse. Now, both eclipses carry the same theme of needing to take responsibility or control as part of our relationship to authority or father figures. So note also that the transiting south node has been in Scorpio and the north node in Taurus since January of 2022 and will remain in those zodiacal signs until they enter Libra Aries polarity circa mid-July of next year in 2023. So all eclipses during the period when the nodes are, the eclipses occur close to the nodes, which is why they're in this, the same signs for that duration or most of that time, which is approximately 18, 19 months. And so during this time, since January of this year and into the mid-year 2023, all eclipses during this period carry the theme of releasing Pluto-ruled scorpionic secrets. That's because Pluto rules Scorpio's south node, and particularly those related to Scorpio and Pluto's archetypal themes of power, money, joint resources, sexuality, and how they relate to deep bonded loyalty, and whether that loyalty is founded on true trust, or if the loyalty is perhaps a bit more about power. Okay, I don't think it's a stretch to talk about, the Republican Party and their sticking staunchly with Donald Trump out of loyalty. We hear that theme all the time. We also hear the theme of how he does not mirror such loyalty back to people, at least past a certain point in their relationship, if they turn on him. So the point here is that, these eclipses also carry the overall theme of moving toward letting go of overpowering or disempowering others through mechanisms like manipulation, coercion, propaganda, dis and misinformation, be it through the power brought by money and or held in sexual relationships, and embracing trust in our bodies and the natural cycles of the feminine divine. There was a podcast I did a while back, I don't remember how long ago, maybe when the nodes moved in January, where I talked about Liz Green, the psychological astrologer, talking about the natural cycles of the feminine divine, and how that, because, here Taurus in particular represents the physical world and the physical body, that there is a physical intuition, and how it arrives to us. It's like getting goosebumps when you know something is true, it's like feeling it in your gut when you know something, you intuit something, right? So it's about now trusting those intuitions, and that letting go of power, which seems somehow always to require a degree of control over others. We want to let go of that power so that we can relax into not needing to transform power into greater power. And here I'm reminded of the remark, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So we might instead relax into transforming the need for power, and power over others, power in relationships, power in politics, power in business, whatever, into a more natural rhythm that results in greater harmony through the Taurian love of peace and serenity, which includes being at one with our physical bodies. Scorpio represents all things hidden. So if anybody's got these nodes and these eclipses in the 12th and the 6th houses, you want to look at your physical health, because they are, 12th house, I don't know why I'm focusing on this, but the 12th house is the house of hidden enemies. And, I always say, it goes back to Walt Kelly's Pogo cartoon from the 1950s and 60s, which I read in the 60s and 70s, which is, we have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. So a hidden enemy is really our unconscious, right, working against us through a programming or a set of soul conditioned programming over our lifetimes and our early childhood that make us believe certain things, which may not actually A, be true, or be in our best interest, right, to believe. So when we let go of that, we can relax, right? And if we are looking at a Taurus North Node in the Virgo-ruled 6th house, naturally, we're looking at a potential for physical illness, or letting go of the kinds of things that can cause physical illnesses before it's detected or too late, all right? So as we ponder that, let's look now ahead to these current eclipses. And Brady's definition of the energy of this set of eclipses is as follows, and again I quote, "This eclipse series is about being forceful and taking power. It has a manic flavor about it, with great force or strength manifesting in the relationship area. Individuals experiencing this Saros series may experience sudden events like falling in and out of love or sudden sexual encounters. The individual may also exert a huge effort in some group activity." End quote. Whoa, did you hear that? Okay. Group activity. And by the way, with this October 25th eclipses, Sun, Moon, and Venus in Scorpio in the 11th house of the U.S. Sibley chart, I think we're witnessing the foreshadow of the rise of feminine energy to, quote, exert a huge effort in some group activity, according to Brady, like getting out the vote between now and November 8th when the next eclipse hits. So the 11th house, for those who don't know, is in the natural chart, it's ruled by Uranus. And Uranus is Aquarius. And it represents the legislature. Okay, 9th house represents the courts, and the 11th house, the actual legislature. So what are we voting on right now in a midterm election in America, which is not a presidential election? If not, who sits in our legislature for our state and then goes to Washington to make decisions in tandem supposedly in the favor of those who put them in those positions. We also know that with all the scorpionic energy and with Scorpio being related to money, that, this whole period of the transiting nodes there and these eclipses can be also equated to the fact that it's money, since the Citizens United Supreme Court decision came down in 2010 that said that corporate PACs, political action committees, and wealthy donors don't have a limit on what they can contribute to a political candidate's election efforts or campaigns. So this is a big deal, right? And we haven't been able to do anything about it here. But just remember that it's in play. So the question is, do we want to back those who want to help empower us? We empower them by getting them in office and they work for us, versus us empowering them to get in office and they work for the corporations, lobbyists, and their wealthy donors like the Koch brothers or Koch brothers, or, what's his name from, Peter Thiel, who was Betsy DeVos's brother, who's a billionaire, who is whatever. They're all, all the right-wing millionaires, and even the Elon Musks and people like that, So let's look at this eclipse's range of influence, right? The eclipse energy now clearly started with the eclipse on October 25th. And remember, I've already mentioned previously that these eclipse themes can begin to manifest about 3 weeks prior to the actual eclipse itself. That's something that Bill Meridian, the astrologer, wrote a book about. I do find it to be true. You can look at it in your own lives. Eclipses are most influential in an individual's life if they fall on a particular planet or angle in our chart. It can be true with an asteroid as well. Many of you know I talk about the goddess asteroids and Chiron and several others. So those are important too. The traditional astrologers, of which Bernadette Brady and Ronnie Dreyer hail from, is they will tell you a degree, that the eclipse has to be within the degree of that sensitive point, regardless of what it is. And if it's not falling on or near a particular planet or angle or other sensitive point, like your part of fortune or one of the goddess asteroids that might be attached, say, for example, to, a sun or moon or an ascendant or something, that it's the house in which it falls that becomes most important. And that's somewhere that I urge everybody just to look at that and then to look up the themes of the houses. I don't usually do that kind of a cookbook on the podcast, but it is pretty easy to find, online in different Astrology Cafe and a few other reputable sites. They usually have somebody, NCGR, ESAR, somebody's writing about the, like the upcoming Mars retrograde through the houses kind of thing. I mean, maybe I'll get into that, but I'm not sure. I tend to want to look at the overall big picture, being a ninth house sun. So what we have is that the eclipse on October 25th, just 2 days ago at 2 degrees Scorpio, because the nodes have not yet hit 2 degrees, the energies will be in play starting approximately 3 weeks before, until the transiting nodes hit that 2 degree Scorpio mark, which will happen circa June 22nd or 23rd. Now, again, I'm using the true node based on the ephemeris in 2023. So we have to wait and see. But to me, that's a sign that those who mobilize most and best, shall we say most efficiently and most effectively, will be the benefactors of taking power post these U.S. midterms elections. So, given what I've been hearing on the news or from mainstream media on mostly, obviously, the liberal side, but, we have to always understand that astrology is impartial, but humans are partial, right? We've seen it happen back in 2016. I mentioned this before, but I sat at the ESAR conference where 12 people on the dais, all astrologers, all professional, all pretty well known, 11 of the 12 said that Hillary Clinton was going to win that election. Now, yes, she did by popular vote, but that's fine. But she didn't take the position of president, right? So they were right and they were wrong, most assuredly. So, when people started to delve into why that was, I think a lot of us just said, personal bias can most definitely get in the way when we're talking about astrology. And I'm no different either, because everybody listening, like I said long ago, if there's anyone listening who's a diehard conservative, anti-abortion, whatever, equality for everyone, regardless of, the drill, regardless of color, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of religion. Anyone who is against that is not going to enjoy my podcast. So bye-bye. So now the November 8th election. So we know that the October 25th, which is passed, is going to be in effect until next June. All right. And we can test that out, right? You want to do your own research on this and think about it and look at your own chart, see where the eclipses are hitting, and if in fact, if you look back at the times that I gave you for last spring's eclipses, you can easily do a little, work and delve into that and see, given the theme of that eclipse, according to Brady. So now the November 8th Taurus full moon lunar eclipse, which occurs at 16 degrees and 1 minute of Taurus, technically is already in effect, given that 3-week idea ahead, right? So, 3 weeks before October 25th, 3 weeks were only a week and a half or so before the November 8th. So no matter how you slice it, this eclipse is in effect. However, the transiting nodes reached the 16-degree mark circa the 27th or 28th of August of this year, 2022. Hence, according to Ronnie Dreyer, this energy should culminate at the actual eclipse on November 8th or thereabouts. I've lately become kind of weary, I guess, of astrologers who are so hell-bent on predicting that the audience tends to think that everything's going to happen smack on. I mean, when I was studying astrology years ago at the Faculty of Astrology in London's summer program, some people were agreeing, and I think this is true, that things that happen most suddenly are often related to Uranus and Aquarius transits, to and from planets in Aquarius, houses ruled by Aquarius, or Uranus, and the movements of Uranus in our charts when it aspects our personal planets or angles. But other than that, nothing happens exactly, right? The energies wax, I've said many times before, and you can feel them beforehand. And some of us, Michael Luton used to say, look, somebody's got a Pluto transit to their sun, and uber sensitive people are going to feel it when that Pluto is 10 degrees away from their sun, which is a couple of years, and others might not feel it until it's a degree past. I mean, Pluto's going to retrograde. That's maybe not the best example because it is such a long-term transit that it would, it follows that its results are going to play out very slowly. But even still, the faster-moving planets will have faster results, more related to the time of the impact, and the others will have much slower. So it's just something to keep in mind because I think people are always so attached to finding out what's going to happen. And instead, if they relax and go, as I've said many times before, let's look back, let's see what led to this. Oh, yes, it happened at this time. Oh, you know what? Maybe that's because Mercury rules my chart. So when that particular aspect occurred to my Mercury, it was right on time. Saturn is known to manifest its energies when there is an aspect made by transiting Saturn or to your natal Saturn in your chart, that it's slow. And sometimes it'll come and go and you won't even feel the effects till afterwards. Liz Green gave an example in one of her lectures that, somebody's father passed away, Saturn, authority figure, father figure, and when they had a transit to their natal Saturn, or it was transiting Saturn to their natal sun, something of that nature, but they didn't have a good relationship or close relationship with their father, so they didn't really do the grieving process. Maybe there's too much anger, or distance between them or whatever. But then maybe 7 months later, this person's pet died, their cat died, and they just couldn't stop crying. So she related it to the fact that the both incidents cause grieving, but that it was at the second incident that the person actually felt the loss, like a double loss, right? So it's just an interesting way to look at things, right? So when we're talking about an eclipse, that's why I'm going into this. It could have already been manifest in our lives and culminate at the actual eclipse, or it could just be beginning. So given that polling, and here I'm going back to politics, which really doesn't seem to work well anymore, and some of that I think is because with the split being so wide between political parties and people who adhere to them, that people don't tell the truth during the polls, or they're not reaching the right people or whatever, or they change their minds, So because the polling is so tight right now, it's a toss-up as to who the majority in the House and Senate will be. But again, those who mobilize best and get the vote out will more than likely reign. So fingers crossed, at least mine are, that it's those who believe in women's rights first and foremost, and then those of all other humans, as I said before, who don't fit only the strictly white, straight, male conservative mold, will reign supreme. But another interesting thing that I wanted to mention about these eclipses, and I'm going to, quote again, according to Brady, they have, she said, quote, a manic flavor about them. And when I do the elemental and modal mix of these two eclipses, I get a dominant function of fixed water, which is Scorpio. And that's to be expected because there's a lot of energy in Scorpio right now. But both eclipses lack the element of fire. So, and while the one in November also lacks cardinal energy. So the October 25th eclipse, which has only one planet in fire, which is Jupiter in Aries, and the November 8th eclipse has no planets in a fire sign, because today Jupiter is retrograding back into Pisces, and no other planets will be in a fire sign. And I do not include angles or Chiron, any but the 9 major planets, and of course Pluto is considered a major planet still by us astrologers. So this is known as inferior function in Jungian psychological terms, which means that it's what lies beneath the Scorpio dominant functions archetype at these lunations. So according to looking at it through the lens of a psychological profile, which can be applied to nations in a mundane way, this translates into the potential for a bipolar kind of energy now. And if we apply both Brady and Dreyer's expertise, we get that there will be, as Brady says, a kind of manic flavor in the collective right now. So in this sense, a lack of fire in the heavens now can demonstrate itself in the form of obsessive thinking. Again, that's a scorpionic shadow. We got the South Node in Scorpio. We got the Scorpio New Moon, but both eclipses have a predominance of Scorpio energy. Acting compulsively. And I just threw in here something that's been fairly recent. At the beginning of this week, think Vladimir Putin, who's placed himself into a corner through his aggressive war on Ukraine to the point where he's now, aiming to destroy the Ukraine's power grids and the major cities. I mean, he's a great example of obsessive and compulsive thinking and actions, right? as is some of these candidates who are election deniers, etc. So an inferior function of fire can also manifest as a kind of mania, in which the collective is in love with being in love, which in its extreme, and in this instance translates into kind of a euphoric psychosis that's far less than reality-based. If anybody knows people who are diagnosed bipolar, and I am not making any judgmental statements about that. I happen to have a good number of friends with that diagnosis, starting from when I hit college. It is what it is, and it's up to them whether they want to try to control it or not through medication or meditation or holistic means or whatever. But the thing is that there is a cycle, and we are in a kind of manic cycle, but alternatively, a lack of fire in the sky may also denote, and this is true for a personal chart too, as a lack of physical energy, feelings of helplessness, and the kind of depression that's cyclical as we move between this manic euphoria and feeling like we're stuck at the bottom of a well with no way out. So if the collective cycles between these two energies, we're presented with two scenarios. One is that in which people remain unmotivated and adopt a kind of who knows, who cares, why bother attitude, versus that of its polar opposite of carrying so much obsessive anger that it results in an uncontrollable kind of rage and aggression. So look around, and you can see both playing out, depending on where you are, where you live, who you know, and how you feel. So the antidote to this is first to recognize that we're in a kind of bipolar energetic political environment right now. And secondly, we might go deep, as the Scorpio energy is wont to do, to determine the source of either our ennui or our rage. Now, rage and anger usually emerge when we felt too disempowered for too long. And when this dissipates, it produces those feelings of helplessness. I don't think there's a pro-choice woman or man, and again, regardless of gender definitions, meaning anyone, as I said before, race, religion, color, I don't care. Anyone in this country who wouldn't say that he or she, they or them, is or are not cycling between these two, even if only minimally, over the past several months as we approach the next two eclipses. Of course, it's obvious that those of us who are pro-choice, just think back to the day that Supreme Court decision came down. I mean, I was as we used to say, I was a manic MFer, okay, on that day. I remember it was about 10:30 that morning, and I saw it on on my, email or my news feed, whatever. And it was like hopping all over the place. I had to go take a walk to calm down. I was manically texting people, So that kind of rage. Now, they've been saying politically that it's kind of been subdued. But, again, as I said, there are a lot of political pundits they're traversing the country and saying there's not pretty much a woman out there, even those like suburban white women who are pro-life, who are in agreement with the abolishment of Roe versus Wade, or the fact that Congress should codify restricting abortions more than they are at the 22 weeks under Roe versus Wade now. So we're all tasked with digging deep into our own feelings of disempowerment now in order to recognize where we may make proactive changes. Because if we don't express ourselves on the deepest emotional levels based on trusting our own instincts, remember, moving towards that Taurus North node, about whether or not we want to be more empowered and in control of our own lives now, then when is that going to happen? And again, the correspondence of moving towards the Taurus North node to be in our bodies, to understand what it feels like. I don't want to get too intense, but that's kind of the way I roll. What does it feel like to be a 10-year-old who was raped by her uncle or her father and then be told she has to carry a child to term. Can you imagine? Can you put yourself in that body for a second? Like, duh. And that's something that men, not all men, but many, enough of them have no concept of. None, right? They can't relate to that at all. So, the ones who do have empathy and compassion and understanding. But the ones that don't are hard and restrictive and rigid in their beliefs. So, the other thing I want to point out about these eclipses is that it's also important to recognize that these Scorpio-Taurus eclipses, because they're predominantly, as I've said, scorpionic in nature, their dominant function is fixed water, represent no going back. So whatever our decisions now, we won't be able to change or correct them later. They will be irreparable. And such is the nature of Scorpio. So I just want to say the other thing about the November 8th upcoming eclipse is that, it's tied into Uranus. The moon is going to be conjoined to, the Taurus moon will be conjoined to Uranus at this eclipse, and they'll be opposing the Sun and Mercury and Venus in Scorpio. So we can see that this is not really going to be a stable time, as many astrologers have already been saying for months on end. But one of the things that I looked up is, moon is the people, right? But moon is our emotions. And in Taurus, we like what we like, and we don't make changes very often. And so, I know that because my mother was a Taurus moon and I'm a Taurus sun. But in the moon, it's like, nope, not going to change. So Uranus, it comes up to Uranus. And one of the things that can happen is that we might change our minds rapidly and suddenly. And then, according to Rob Hand in his Planets in Transit, one of the definitions of this particular aspect is that we might regret our change of mind that was impulsive and momentary. We might regret it later. So all it makes me think of is people filling out their ballots, because clearly both of these eclipses are very, very prevalent during this whole voting period because of early voting. I think something like 30 million people or something like that have already voted. So even leading up to the October 25th eclipse, we have a lot of people who have already voted. So they're not voting under, this immediate impulsive energy on November 8th, potentially, possibly that day before even, with early voting at the polls or drop-in ballot, drop-in mailboxes, etc. But standing online and overhearing a conversation behind us and then thinking, wow, they're right. Why did I think this? Let me change my vote when I get to the booth, right? So I would caution people now and leading up to Election Day, regardless of how you vote, to be very, very careful about a sudden change of opinion, because it may well come back to haunt you later and be irreparable, right? So, these are things that it's important to note. So let's remember also, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, that these eclipses are about getting down to the heart of the matter, okay? And the heart of the matter is to remember, recognize, and act as if you have the power, because in truth, you had it all along. And as part of the collective, we have the power, right? So these eclipses remind us, especially this one that just passed, the Scorpio New Moon partial solar eclipse, how powerful we really are and how much control we really do have over our own evolutionary processes. So when the decisions we make, not only politically but elsewhere in our lives, reflect that we, again, are the powerful ones, then we can accomplish the necessary evolutionary changes that ensure our long-term survival. Now, last week's Sun-Venus cardinal squares to Pluto, which I talked about at length then challenged us to stand up to bullies. Those both obvious and subtle, whether it's, up against the wall or, honey, right, subtle, and adjust our perspective about who's for real and whose bluster is simply full of it. Now, self-empowerment should have come easily now, because yesterday Mercury in Libra formed an Aries trine to Mars in Gemini. That was October 16th. And it was easier for us perhaps to share our thoughts and opinions and hold our own to defend our perspectives against opposing viewpoints. But also what was waxing into fruition over the last day or two that culminated this morning is Mercury in Libra still, his square to Pluto, right? So remember we had the Sun, Venus squares to Pluto last week, and that's followed a week later, today on the 27th, by this cardinal square. Now, that can cause some obsessive thinking, which in turn causes us to double down on our own beliefs, especially if others are trying to ram their beliefs down our throats, right? So, it's just interesting to note that there were all of these debates over the last couple of days, political debates between candidates on either side for Senate and for the House of Representatives, and even some on the local level. So, Mercury is communication, Gemini is talking about voting, right? I've already pointed that out previously. Gemini is near neighborhood, local area, right? So you're voting for your local representatives. This one is not a presidential election, as I said. So, we may be listening, but we also saw an awful lot, and I had pointed out a few weeks ago, and I'll get back to it, but there's a quincunx between Mars and Pluto right now, and it's not going to perfect until they move into their next signs of Cancer and Aquarius, excuse me, to perfect that quincunx. But the energy is still there, and there's a lot of negative, again, manipulation, power plays, and control, particularly through things like propaganda, especially with Mars in Gemini. So it's funny to keep that in mind that, there is a lot of use of certain words that are very scorpionic, and they're also, now inherently, neither Mars in Gemini or Pluto in Capricorn are about religion, but we're seeing this blurring of lines and the rhetoric that's used, right? Because the Democrats are evil and they represent the devil, and things like that. So what I want to point out is, again, that, others are sort of trying to ram those things down our throats if we're not of that persuasion. And when Jupiter retrogrades back into Pisces, which it does late tonight and early tomorrow on October 27th or 28th, depending on your time zone, it may likely dissolve even further boundaries between two of the things related to Jupiter energy, which are law and religion. And law is based on fact. And religion, you will have to pardon me for saying this, but is a bit more related to storytelling handed down through the ages and archetypal identifications, which really lean more towards fiction. Okay, so I'm not trying to alienate anyone who has, a devout belief in a particular religion, but there's a blurring of these boundaries now, as we've seen with the Supreme Court, which has been and is accused of being religious zealots, right-wing religious zealots, and siding in favor of those which religious beliefs, like that football coach who's allowed to pray and bring the students to pray with him in the middle of the football field after the game, which has nothing to do with his actual job, right? And they voted in his favor to allow him to continue to do that when the school had brought suit against him, right? So Jupiter remains retrograde and in Pisces until November 23rd, when the planet ruling law, higher education, travel, and religion stations direct. And Jupiter will move forward again and re-enter Aries again on December 20th. So during his retrograde in Pisces, again, I would expect the lines between Jupiterian themes to become blurred. Front burner issues, particularly those related to the upcoming U.S. elections, such as inflation, Jupiter represents expansion after all, immigration, court decisions related to voting and equality, including those of the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, may be marked by even greater religious rhetoric now. As we adjust our beliefs now, Mercury also enters intense Scorpio on October 29th, and he'll be there until November 17th. And Mars, of course, stations retrograde in Gemini now until January 12th of 2023. And he stays in Gemini until March, once he's forward again. So to sum up, it's time to find the inner strength to rise above manipulation and coercion and guide our own evolutionary processes toward greater health and happiness now. And as usual, I hope to devote more time to Mars retrograde, so I am going to put more out there next week, but if not before. But I want to read to you just briefly from my favorite psychological Jungian astrologer, Erin Sullivan's book, Retrograde Planets. And she says, I'm quoting here, when transiting Mars stations and turns retrograde, all externalized drive and focused energy reverses its direction. The daily progress of which one normally takes no note suddenly becomes filled with effort. As mentioned, this is a result of the excitement of the Sun trine about 2 weeks prior to the station, where an energy flow from Sun to Mars gives the illusion that everything is moving along quite well. The station can be an abrupt phenomenon, creating a cessation of interest, drive, energy, and focus in what might have been an important project or relationship prior to that station. These doldrums could very well last through the entire retrograde period, past the station direct of Mars, right up until it reaches the degree at which it's stationed and turned retrograde, which is 25 degrees Gemini, 36 minutes. The frustrated energy will manifest around issues pertaining to the house to which it is transiting and upset the continuum of efforts and plans. Now, that, I don't want to leave you thinking that's the total sum of it, all right? But she also says, wherever Mars is transiting retrograde, we are contacting deep-seated and often disguised forms of rage, passion, heat, energy, raw libido, and ambition. We might not be consciously aware of what is stirring deep within the psyche, but feelings, moods, events, and circumstances that surface around the time of the transiting Sun-Mars opposition identify a specific area which needs to come to conscious awareness. Psychologically, it is necessary to expel the festering energy in order to become a more productive person. All right, so, there's just certain things here that I think it pays to notice. She says, should we feel disorganized and chaotic, Mars retrograde will exacerbate that state and throw everything to the winds, creating emotional turmoil and internal riots. Remember what I said about the lack of fire and mania, okay? So again, the reason why so many astrologers have not been very happy about these eclipses, particularly the one falling on November 8th at this midterm election, is that there's a lot of hidden rage here, right? And that can go either way. But this can, she says, continues to say, Erin Sullivan, this can very easily spill out into our environment, forcing us to pay close attention to our internal war. There is a timing device that seems hooked into Mars, as for all planets and their retrograde cycles, but it is specific to martial experiences. One becomes acutely aware of one's capacity for diplomacy and strategy throughout the cycle. Above all, patience and alertness must be employed and sustained, or exhaustion and depression may ensue. All right, she says, depression, normally equated with Saturn, is also a Mars function. Melancholy is black anger, from the Greek kolos, the bile which chemically activates anger. People with Mars retrograde natally seem to have to cope with an underlying depression of energy and enthusiasm, since when they were born, Since they were born when Mars was transiting retrograde, it's logical that their energy level and assertiveness functions are in sympathy with the times when they were born. The frustration engenders a burning within the individual which must be blown out before it consumes the inner sense of self-worth. So she says this is an ideal time for everyone to determine the difference between depression of the senses or psychic apathy and simple lack of interest. To press on in a situation which appears fruitless is sheer bloody-mindedness, not brave assertiveness. It might be appropriate, therefore, to relinquish a once beloved project, attitude, relationship, or goal, rather than persist aggressively in outmoded activities once Mars completes its retrograde cycle. So again, I'm going to refer everyone to these upcoming elections. If you are an American, if you are listening to this, and if you are feeling frustrated about women losing all of their rights to, again, as I said, bodily autonomy, right? And the only way now to make our wishes known and to allow us to actually rectify or make a difference, or whatever you want to call it, right, in our collective is to mobilize en masse and make a difference. So I just want to finish again with not Liz Green, with Erin Sullivan's remarks. She says, even though inspiration often goes underground when Mars is retrograde, only to resurface upon the direction of Mars with a new and more realistic goal. It is as if the battle between conscious will and unconscious intent needs to take place in extreme private and secrecy, revealing itself only when the victor is assured of its supremacy. In this case, the battle is between the conscious self and the unconscious self, that mysterious aspect of the psyche which contains the power to direct one's life force. And if we remember that our unconscious self combines with the collective unconscious, we get a better feel for what's going on and what can potentially happen right now, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. All right, so that's it for today. And I want to thank everyone for joining me. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on November 3rd for another episode of Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.